some people ask if there would be taste testing. sorry, there's no taste testing. But we will have text studies. Hopefully that will be enough food for the soul. I want to share with you some, we are going to do some sort of text study that I think is relevant for high holidays. I used this last year. And I think besides for just being interesting text that I think is relevant, I think that there's interesting take-home and I think somewhat important ideas for growth and self-improvement, things that are important to think about, as hopefully we'll explain. As a sort of building block, I think, are most people aware of the Doheny meat scandal this year?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Like a well-known thing, right?
Yeah.
Right, so this is unfortunately not the first time that a kosher establishment has been caught selling non-kosher meat that they pretended to be, that was kosher. And one of the questions that always comes up, and I'm going to use this just as a basis for the discussion, and you'll see hopefully where we'll go with it, is the following question. Let's say you bought your meat at a restaurant, at a butcher that was you thought was a kosher butcher, and you've been eating your meat there, from there, and then you find out that it's actually not kosher. So what do? What next? Like, is that bad? Did that impact you? Is non-kosher meat only bad if you know it's not kosher? Or what if you thought you even paid the extra money for kosher meat, but then you actually got imitation, I don't know, Zaki Farms, I don't know what it is. So, trafe, yeah. So, is that bad? That's the question. And so I want to share with you a few texts, and what I want to show you is two different streams of rabbinic thought on if it's bad and if so, why. And then I want to take those streams and show how they would impact us today as we prepare for the high holidays and as we stand on Yom Hadin, so to speak, and the message that we might be able to share. So it all starts with this text in the Talmud in the Tractate of Yom. That's why I put Yom Kippur, but then I changed it in the source sheets to non-kosher meat, self-esteem, and just the high holidays, because really it's relevant to the whole thing. So it says, Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael. This is source number 1 here. Aveira mitamtemet libo shel adam. A sin, transgression, obstructs the heart of a person. We already heard about coronary artery obstruction. So that's what it's saying. The Talmud is saying that actually he said, you have to change your lifestyle, you have to start eating more healthy. Maybe the Talmud would say, no, you have to start changing your behavior. What does it mean? Shenamar, the Torah tells us in Vayikra, this is in Shemini, where we learn about non-kosher animals. Lo titmeu bahem v'nitmeitam bam. You should not become contaminated by them and through the non-kosher animals. So the Talmud says, Al tikrim v'nitamten. Don't read it that you should become contaminated. Ela mitamten. It shouldn't be nitmeitem. Ela mitamten. Nitmeitem would be contaminated. Nitamten is constructed, obstructed, right? So it's just changing the vowels of the word to change it from contamination to obstruction. That's what the Talmud is trying to argue. But what does it mean exactly? What does it mean that a sin makes you obstructed? It obstructs your heart. So this is what I want to share with you, the two different approaches in the Rishonim. First you have the Maharal. Really is an Achron. He's from the 16th century in Prague, one of the great Jewish thinkers. And he explains this in what I would consider to be a rational way. Could it really be that your heart is actually changed by eating non-kosher foods or by doing something that's considered a sin? Does that actually obstruct your heart? Or is it something else? So this is what he says, and we'll just read a portion of this in source number 2. He says, Hareki lo amru rak aveira mitamtemet libo sha'adam. It just says that aveira, that sin, obstructs the heart. It doesn't say he's arguing that the food obstructs your heart. So what does it mean? Vamar, ki atimtum hazeh, this obstruction, mitzad aveira ki mipnei she'avar ha-mitzvot asher roi la'adam mitzam asher nafsho nefesh eloki. Because you have gone against what is a proper way for you to behave, given that your soul is a godly soul. What is that? So if you skip the next line, he then says, Ein zeh mitzad hateva shel shratzim. It's not in the Torah, but there was talking about shratzim, the creepy colored animals. It's not because the animals make your body somehow less pure. It's because you have done an action that you know to be, so to speak, like rebellious or against your value system. And you can read this in any kind of way that you think is most meaningful to you. But the fact that you've done something that is inappropriate, whatever that might be, your heart is somehow dulled. It dulls your heart. If you believe, and we could be totally expansive, we're talking about non-kosher meat, but if you believe that that meat in general, that it's improper to eat meat, and so you believe that vegetarianism is ethically more appropriate, but then one day you just your temptation gets the best of you, and so you have a steak. So if your values really instruct you that eating meat is wrong, so he's arguing, then that steak that you ate, it somehow obstructs your heart because you've gone against your values. Your values have been dulled, sullied, so to speak. Not that your soul is actually worse off, but you're not living up to what you actually have professed to believe in. So too, he's arguing that what does it mean when the Talmud says it's v'netam tem, not v'netmetem, that it obstructs your heart? It's that whenever you do something that you know is wrong, that you know you shouldn't be doing, it kind of makes you less real, so to speak, in terms of keeping it real, right? So that's what it. But it's not that the nature of the animal actually changes your heart. This is how it concludes. If so, she'im kain, the bottom line there, Haita HaTorah Sefer Refuot or Sefer HaTeva. The Torah would just be like a book of healing, a book of nature, a science book to tell you, if you eat that food, your heart will be less pure. But it's not. It's supposed to be a book of values and a guideline. It's just trying to tell you that if you go against what you believe is right, then you'll be somehow sullied. You will be less true to yourself, right? That's the Maharal, and I think it makes a lot of sense. The Ramban is what I would say is the opposite approach. And we'll discuss this in a second. The Ramban is always known for being mystically oriented, right? So the Ramban, his commentary right there on the Torah, I think if you just took out a couple of lines, if you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines there, I think the main point there he says is, Shiroi hu sheyachol ha'adam, a person should eat, kol ma sheyichye bo, whatever keeps him alive. And v'ein ha'asurim b'machalim rak tahara b'nefesh, the things that are prohibited is what keeps your soul pure. Sheteichal devarim nekiim, you have to eat clean things. Shelo yolidu ove v'gasut b'nefesh, that the prohibited things would actually cause you to have a certain amount of like pridefulness or inappropriateness in your soul. Your soul will be less proper and less humble if you eat non-kosher things. That's what the Ramban is arguing. It's very different than the Maharal. The Maharal is saying you go against your values, you're not true to yourself, so that's less, you've become obstructed. You're not living up to what you believe in. The Ramban is saying that it's actually something about the food that actually hurts you. Right? And it seems to be, he actually says it explicitly on the next page, that it's just the shratzim. But then if you go on in the Shar Gemul, in another book that he wrote, he says it clearly that it's all non-kosher food even. Source number 4, he says, Kol davar ha'asr malach lechanefesh. Anything that's forbidden actually makes your soul dirty. Umitame osan, it makes it impure. It says, Lafikach nikra shogeg chota. And that's why even someone who does it by mistake is still a sinner. That's what the Ramban says. So now just think about the question. We go back. I think we have 2 schools of thought. Go back to this question of dohini kosher meat. So let's say you've been buying meat there your whole life, and now you go to your client comes to you and says, okay, I've been eating this meat. I didn't know it wasn't kosher. Did it affect me at all? So it seems that the Maharal, I want to hear if you agree with me, but if the Maharal, it seems to be saying, well, you thought you were doing something that was right, you thought it was kosher, and that's what you believe in, so no, it didn't hurt you, just now you have to shop somewhere else. Whereas the Ramban would say, actually, yeah, it did affect you. He talks about there you have to bring korbanos as the way to fix it, and you can't do that today, so it would be through prayer, or there's you have to figure out how to correct the sin today. But it seems to be that the Rabban would actually feel that it does affect you. Yeah.
I think it's considered as chote b'shgaga because it wasn't intentional. So he still owes to do the right thing. But the question is how it affects his soul.
Right.
Even though he's chote b'shgaga, how does it affect his soul? Even though he's not.
Right, but why should b'shgaga? Why should it even be chotesh? He or she didn't know. They didn't know what they were doing. So it shouldn't even be chotesh. It should be just shogeg, accidental, no sin. But he's trying to argue that that's why we have a concept that even someone that sins by mistake, even though it's not as bad, it still affects their soul. That seems to be the Ramban's approach. It's actually like a mystical impact.
I'm puzzled by the fact that you label that mystical. It seems to me the most materialist and kind of scientific, magical approach.
Okay.
And so and maybe you could talk a little bit more about why you see that as a mystical.
Well, just because I don't think that he's actually saying that like your bloodstream is actually any different by eating this meat, but I think he's trying to say...
That's what he does seem to be saying. Where
Okay.
maybe
he's saying that.
Draw that
but like
evidence?
Balachle hanefesh is his term. Like it actually makes your soul dirty. I don't know, I see it as being a mystically, like I see it like, there's a story that they say about him that he once met someone, he was debating with someone. You know, he was always involved with debates. He actually got expelled from Spain because he won a debate. So there's a story that he debated with someone, and after the debate, apparently, you know, he won the debate, and he said to the person, he said, it was two Jews. The debate he got kicked out for was with Christians. It was with another Jew who was debating, and he said, oh, that was an easy debate. That person clearly eats non-kosher food because they don't think as clearly. I think that's totally like mystical. It's like, how could you, if we scientifically analyze non-kosher food and kosher food, I don't think there's a difference. But for him, and I think he would admit that. But maybe not. Maybe he could say that actually God prohibited certain foods because they cause your soul, and they actually through genetic, like biologically, yeah, maybe. I think I see it as mystical, but okay, interesting point. Yeah.
I have two thoughts. One is that in the same way that people swear by certain remedies that make them healthy, but there's yes or no scientific evidence that cures them, one could say that they believe that non-kosher meat is bad for them, then that's how it's going to be for them. It's going to contaminate their soul because it will make them even physically ill, maybe, if they know they've eaten it.
Right, that's interesting.
So it kind of depends on who you're dealing with, whether they need the rational or the mystical answer. But then there's, I think, maybe a third possibility, and I just thinking about a Mishnah in Psachim, that if a person has walked over a grave and they didn't know that there were graves there, are they tameh?
Yeah.
And the Mishnah says, well, the tzitz of the diadem of the Kohen Gadol cancels out the tumah, so that they can still eat the korban pesach. I think is the issue, and I'm thinking that's like a third way in between what the nature of the meat itself is, that there's something else that can create a certain kind of cancellation or forgiveness or sort of get out of jail free card or something like that. It's just you can now move on, and acknowledge that it happened, but now you can move on.
Right. Interesting. Very good. What I'm going to start moving towards is like some applications of these ideas and see which gets favored in traditional Jewish literature. Because let me ask you two questions that I'll throw out there, and we'll see answers to them. What if we had the following question in the hospital? We have this question.
I'm sorry?
What if we had the following question in the hospital? And a few interesting questions. What if somebody was their doctor, let's say it's Shabbat, and their doctor tells them, you need sugar. Let's see what it is. And we have, or whatever it might be that we have for you non-kosher, we can provide for you right now. You could get it. You could go and let's say get from the vending machines, or somehow you could get shipped in some way that would be violating Shabbat. You could get it kosher, but we have for you right here non-kosher, and it's needed for your health. We can provide it for you right now. So which would the rabbis, and I guess I'm going to share with you one Orthodox rabbi, but what would be better, to violate Shabbat and get the kosher food, or to have the non-kosher food and thereby not have to violate Shabbat? But let's say you could do both. You could do both. Right, Pikuach Nefesh, to save a life, you would do anything. But let's say you have the choice. You could easily do both in the same, basically, amount of time. Or how about this question? What if you had a child, this is a real question, a child who's mentally disabled, and there is a place that they would have to live, there'd be a boarding care facility where they could go, and they're known that place could treat this in particular disorder this child has, and they know that they could treat them there. It's a great place, but they do not allow any outside food there, and the food there will be not kosher. Could they send the child there? So these are two questions that have been asked to rabbinic authorities, and I want to just give you one piece of background information. I'll show you what they said, and then I want to start, because I want to spend the majority of our discussion on the self-esteem section of the 3 points that we started with. So interesting. First of all, the Chassam Sofer, who I know raises different eyebrows in different communities, But Chassam Sofer, what he writes in his commentary on the Talmud, he just said very simply. He said, Nir Alin is source 5, Bishlam Achilat Isur. It makes sense that even something that's forbidden to eat, Afagav de Ba'ones Have, even though it was by mistake. Upater. And therefore, if you do something by mistake, you're not pater mi onesh, you're not punished. Mikom makom mitamtem halev. It still obstructs your heart. And he points us then to the Ramah. What does the Ramah say? The classic Moshe Isser list, the Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, 16th century Poland. This is what it says in the Code of Jewish Law. I'm not saying this is something that everyone, here's what it says. We'll just read it together. Chalav kutit kechalav Yisrael. Non-Jewish milk, so I'm not feeding a baby. If the milk comes from someone who's not Jewish, or it comes from someone who's Jewish, it doesn't matter. It's the same. It's milk. However, mikol makom, lo yaniku tinok min hakutit. But the baby shouldn't nurse from a non-Jew. Why? In Efshar Yisrael, if it's possible to nurse from a Jewish woman. Why? Techalav kutit mitamtem alev. Because somehow the milk will dull the soul. And so too, this person who's feeding the baby shouldn't eat afil Yisrael, even if she's Jewish, the varim ha'asurim, forbidden food. Let's say she has to also medically. So to the child itself. Mazik lo beziknuto. Because all this will damage the child when the child grows up. It will somehow. This is what the Shach said. The Shach is the classic commentary. Shabtai Cohen, 17th century Vilna. Here he says, if you go like 3 lines in, he says, Nafkamina, what's the practical ramification? If she's sick, the Indian that you have to feed, the woman has to eat forbidden foods, then lo yitin ha'av latinok minek mimenu, then the child shouldn't be eating from this mother. El yizchor lo minek adacheret, you should rather get a different wet nurse. Why? He goes down to the very bottom there. Shemetamtem alev v'gorm lo teva ra. It'll actually cause the child to have a bad nature. Now, I just showed you this because I'm asking the question, and I still want to go back, and I think we can have the flexibility to analyze it on our own and not be necessarily bound by what those rulings are. But I want to just show you what, and from my study, I think that there's 2 streams of thought. What I'm calling the rational explanation of going against what you believe to be right is bad for you ethically. Just whatever you believe is right, if you transgress your own values, it somehow dulls your belief system. Whereas other school of thought is mystical, that these actual prohibitions actually harm your soul. And what my first question just was is, which approach do the decisors, the legal authorities, so to speak, take? And it seems to be that the Code of Jewish Law is taking this side that there's actually a mystical ramification because a baby doesn't make a decision, and he's actually trying to argue that it actually has an impact on the baby when the baby grows up. And this is actually how the rabbis answer the 2 questions I just shared with you. The Tzitz Eliezer on the top of page 3, we won't read these inside, but the Tzitz Eliezer was asked this question. He was the rabbi of Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. And when you say the rabbi of hospital, it's different than when we say that I'm the rabbi of Cedar Sinai. My job is much more pastoral. His job was to answer legal questions. That was what he did. He set policy for the hospital. So the question came up. We have food available that sometimes, our kitchen is closed on Shabbat. Sometimes you could get it on Shabbat, but you might have to either pay in a vending machine or you might have to actually break something to get it out. Would you transgress Shabbat? But, and he's asked this question from another hospital, actually, now I think about it, because I don't think at Shaarei Tzedek you can even get non-kosher food if you wanted to. But at the other hospital where they asked the question was, but we could provide for the patient something that's not kosher. And he says, you'd rather break Shabbat than eat non-kosher food. And he gives the reason, because breaking Shabbat, it's for a permitted reason. It's to help someone's health. That's allowed. So you're not even transgressing Shabbat. You're just doing something what you got to do. But eating non-kosher food, even though it would also be permitted for the sake of health purposes, it still has a mystical impact on the soul. That's what he argues. So to the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer writes, now this is just interesting, quick side point. When we talk in a pluralistic environment, me as an Orthodox rabbi and the Chassam Sofer, who I know very well, is we consider to be basically the founder of Haredi Judaism, and he was vicious, he had, so for me, as an Orthodox Jew, when we try to figure out how to have a pluralistic mindset, it takes a lot, sometimes some kind of creativity. So for me, the Maharal's approach is very easy, because for someone, let's say someone drives on Shabbat. Well, to the Maharal, they're not, if they can make an argument why that is Judaically and ethically permissible, so they're actually not, from their perspective, they're not doing anything wrong. To them, it's okay, and they're not harming their soul. They can justify it. To the Ramban, they're actually like hurting themselves, and I should feel bad for them and want to change them. So for me to take the Maharal's approach is much more expansive. But the Chassam Sofer, and you'll see where he goes with this. Yeah.
But after you shared the opinion of the Tzitz Eliezer, it seems like he's giving special status to food, not just any sin.
That's true. Yeah. He is giving special status to food. I shortened the source sheet, and I'd be happy to share the broader source with anyone. From what I found, in the 11th chapter of Mesilat Yesharim, he has a whole piece there about how he expands this like to any prohibited action. He's also very mystically oriented, the path of the just, or how you translate it. And he says any prohibition, when you prohibit it, it actually stains your soul.
So why does it put food's worse? I guess we should take.
But I guess because that verse, that piece in the Talmud that we started with, it was quoted a verse in Shemini which was about non-kosher food. So it seems to be that's been like highlighted as the most severe thing that actually sullies our soul. Yeah.
If you're suggesting that break into a vending machine to get kosher food is better than eating the non-kosher food that's free, but breaking into the machine is committing two of the others. One, violating Shabbat, and second,
stealing,
damaging the machine.
Right. So hopefully you pay back for what. Yes, I agree. Hopefully that you would take responsibility for that action after Shabbat, and you would understand that you were having to save a life. Yeah.
It strikes me that what is behind the notion that you shouldn't have a non-Jewish wet nurse isn't really about food at all, but it's about not wanting to be close to non-Jews. It's essentially the same notion as non-kosher wine. The base of non-kosher really is that you don't want to be in connection with Gentiles who might be using the wine for another purpose.
Okay.
So, so you're reading this quite literally, but it strikes me that much deeper is stay away from that what tarnishes the soul is an intimate connection that a Jewish child might have with a non-Jewish metapelet.
Right.
Maybe,
Okay.
So,
I'm reading it because of that last line. It says, "Kikoze maziklo designuto," and to argue that just sharing the company of someone who's not Jewish as a baby, but I'm reading it based on. But you're right, you could read it other ways. But I'm reading it with the Shach, the classic commentary on the Ramah. Of course, people could read it differently, but so I'm trying to show a trend in Jewish law, and so the Shach, that's how the Shach at least reads it. And this is how the Chassam Sofer, he answers this question. It's interesting. He was asked this question, a real-life question. They wanted to send a child who had, they don't say exactly, but it seems to be some form of autism or some way that the child was not able to go to the schools that they had. And of course, in those days, they weren't as well prepared to deal with children who had any kind of disabilities as we might be today. So they had to send them off to institutions. But they knew that they had good institutions in the big cities that could help. And he goes to a whole analysis. The father is asking, am I, because there's this whole thing, machilu b'yadayim. You're not allowed to actually do something yourself, but if the child does it on their own, it's okay. But I can't force my child to, let's say, transgress Shabbat. But if they did it themselves, they're just a child. They're not obligated. So he goes to an analysis. Is the father, by sending the child to a place that was in Vilna, or something, it was in Vilna, by me sending them there, and I know they're going to feed them non-kosher food, is that like as if I put the non-kosher food in front of the child and made them eat it? He goes through a whole analysis and he answers no. You just sent them there to have help and to have therapy. You didn't send them there to eat the food, so it's not your fault. Don't worry about it. They could go. But then he concludes the very end. If you go 8 lines from the bottom, he then concludes by saying it's allowed, and then he says even though it's allowed. He says, "Im kain, hachi shari b'tanai, it will be allowed. Shekashiyagi leben yagim, once he becomes bar mitzvah, shani v'yom echad, when at 13 years old in a day, yotziuhu misham al kapanim. At least take him out when he got his bar mitzvah. Fine. But then he says, zenyon yistaktim mi'ikraitin. That's the law. Mikol makom, however, Idu kadmoni nizal, our previous rabbis have already testified, al yedei ma'echalot asurot, through eating non-kosher foods, b'na'arut, as a child, B'tamtem halev, it obstructs the heart. Umolid lo tevara, and it causes them to have a bad, nature. So he therefore says, Adayin and Omer. So therefore I say, Mutav sheyiyeh shote kol yom. He's better off staying in this mental capacity his whole life. and hopefully pray to God and God will help him. And that's what he concluded. That's how far he's willing to take this. Now it's interesting, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in our own generation was asked the same question. He quotes us and he says, but I don't agree, and I think, for this reason and that reason we could read it differently, but this doesn't only apply in that case. But anyways, this is an extreme, I think as your reaction shows, but it's how far, he says that you'd rather have the child not receive this therapy than ingest non-kosher food. Obviously they're taking this in a mystical way, and what I want to share with you is on the last page, what I find to be most inspiring for the high holidays. And I think meaningful. And you can take this now in two ways. And I want to try to argue, though your comments I think have been valid and show there's other ways of reading this, that the same view of the ramifications of sin can be used to describe the causes of sin. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to find out. If we're trying to improve ourselves, we're trying to ask, what makes me behave in ways that I don't want to be behaving? And when I use the word sin, I'm trying to be expansive. I'm not just saying, what makes me eat, whatever. I'm trying to say, what makes me do things that go against my belief system? So I believe that you can take it in the same wrap. You can take the same, and you have the mystical view and the rational view. The mystical view, I think, is you have here in Rav Kook. Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik are always compared in tshuva, because they both wrote works on repentance, and they take very different views. And Rav Kook's view is you're returning to your inner self. That every person is holy, and sin pulls them away from their holiness and obstructs them, and you have to clean it up. It's like there's a story of, there's this sofer who writes Torahs, going around Europe, and going to synagogues, opening Torahs, taking his little quill, and erasing words in the Torah. And there was a man who was traveling also, and he finally starts to say, I saw that guy in that town, that shtetl. And he's taking out his feather, and he's erasing the Torah. This is an abomination. This guy's, there must be some verse in there. Back then it didn't have computers. If you just go around and erase every Torah, you could probably get rid of a certain verse if you didn't like it. Maybe that's an easier way than other things, So he says, what is this guy doing? So he finally confronts him. And he says, what verse are you erasing from the Torah? You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm going to make this, I'm going to publicize this. And he says, take a closer look. He says, I'm not erasing verses. I'm going around. Look at what I'm doing. I'm not writing new things in. He says, I'm just dusting the Torahs off. I feel that it's appropriate to go around and clean the Torahs in places that they're not used enough. That's my job as a sofer. So this person who heard this then turned to his community and said, now as a rabbi, I realized this is my job too. I used to think my job was to either erase parts I didn't like or to write in new parts. I realized, my whole job is just to dust you off a little bit. Because deep down, you're all holy. And this is the approach of Rav Kook, right? That sin clouds the soul. This is what he writes. We'll just read the first couple lines. It says, Kol chet noveh mi pigam bichot hanefesh. Every sin comes from some kind of a defect in a person's soul. Nechvash hanefesh, when the soul becomes weakened, meaning like covered over, darkened. Ve'ena yechol la'amod neged nitiyat harasha ba. So therefore you can't, you always have this good side and the bad side, and the good side usually overcomes the bad side. But when your good gets clouded and lost and forgotten, it can't overcome the bad. So he says the next line there, Machlishu et koach haratzon shel hatov. It weakens your desire to do good. But it all comes from the clouding. It's like, this is like where you get aveira gorera to aveira. One sin leads to another, because once you do one, it's like it clouds you. When I first heard this taught, the rabbi taught it to us. Said, when I learned this book from Orat HaTshuva, he was a Lubavitcher. He said that he heard a story. So these are just stories, but it's just the story is just whether it's true or not. But he says he knows a story that a friend of someone who he knows went to the Lubavitcher Rabbi and said, I want to talk to you because I have disagreements with the Torah, whatever. And I want to tell you my complaints and show you where I think you are wrong, and you need to be open to these modern challenges. So he says the Rabbi listened to him, and he said, "What's your response?" He said, "I'll make a deal with you." The Rabbi says to the person, he says, "Stop doing this, and that, which you're doing now." Because apparently there's miraculous that he knew those things. Start making kiddush Friday night, and put up mezuzahs in your house. Go to the mikvah once. This is like this whole, say 3 Hail Marys, call me in the morning. Go to the mikvah once, and then 6 months from now, come back and I will be happy to debate you. So the guy comes back in 6 months and says, Rabbi, I realized my question. I did all the things you said, and I realized I don't have the questions anymore. So the way the person told the story, he was trying to argue that, you see, his soul became like purified, and therefore that was the only reason why he had those. Okay, whatever you think about that story, the point is, Rav Kook, whatever I think about the story, I mean, I gave it away. Rav Kook's point is that there is, like, every person is holy, and every person is has a certain, purity, but it just becomes like dirty and covered, and it becomes hard to access it. And so repentance is returning to the true self that really is us. On the other side, you have Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was about creation of the self, who his whole thing was, you have to remake yourself. You cannot be that person who you were when you made the mistake. You can become a new person. So he writes, in what he first says, that some people sin because they're arrogant. People are just arrogant, they don't care, so that's why they make mistakes. But he says that then there's another type. Number 11, page 4, he says, sin often results not from arrogance, but rather from self-negation. This type of sinner is subservient to everything and everyone. He or she is a spiritual wanderer. He doesn't want to sin, yet submits to temptation. He wants to repent, but feels he cannot. He senses the call of holiness, but does not answer. One of the greatest mercies that God bestows on man and woman on Yom Kippur is his perception of us not as arrogant sinners, but rather as weakling sinners, for were otherwise, favorable judgment would be impossible. And so what I want to start to argue is that we could take a view that the goal, the challenge of the high holidays in particular, is to change our self-perception and to have improved self-esteem. That if we see certain things as being like what they say, like pasnish, that's beneath me, like I'm better than that, then that is the ticket to self-improvement. Along the lines of the Maharal, what I was trying to argue is the rational school of thought here. I think, well, let me say something and then I'll read, because I think that the story, that this piece, that the last piece here actually says it most clearly. Fine, I'll tell you a story first, then we'll read this. Because when I started, this is what made me realize this. So I work in a hospital. So one day I got a call to visit a patient who was Greek Orthodox. So I'm Orthodox, but I thought, Greek Orthodox, like, are they confused? Is this a mistake? Like, they thought that Orthodox rabbis are more similar to Greek Orthodox Christians because we all have Orthodox in our title. I was like, maybe there's a mistake. I don't know. So I walked in. The first thing I want to do is make sure, because they asked for a rabbi. If they asked for a chaplain, I'm the one to go. So that's a different approach. So I would have walked in and said, okay, I'm a chaplain. I wouldn't even introduce myself as a rabbi. But I'm trying to figure out why they asked Dafka for a rabbi. So I walk in the room and I say, I'm not going to say, hi, I'm the rabbi here. So the wife of the patient immediately stands up. The patient fixes his, and they say, oh, the rabbi, please come. We're so honored that you're here. Oh, would the rabbi like to sit? They refer to me in the third person. I'm like, okay, for sure they're not Jewish now. I've never received Jews. So, and the patient says, Rabbi, I feel healed already that your presence is here. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like really weird. So the whole time they're like, oh, we're so honored to have the rabbi in our room. And so we just talked for a few minutes. And they're like, no, that's it. We just wanted to meet the rabbi. So I'm like, gosh, I hope I didn't disappoint them. But it was just like a weird experience. So as I'm walking out of the room, I think to myself, like, if in Judaism, like, we got treated that way, I would probably be like the most arrogant. Like, how would that? I was thinking to myself, like, how would that impact me? Like, between that. Then as I'm walking down the hall, I started to think to myself the opposite. I started to think, what if I thought about myself that way? No one's going to treat me that way. Maybe once in a, but like, what if I thought, not if I think of myself that I deserve this treatment. What if I thought, like, you know what? People actually saw me as representing God and as being like a holy person. And now I'm going to go like, I remember it was like in March, and there's a bunch of guys that work in the environmental services. We stake out a room in the hospital. We watch March Madness together. So I was like. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was like, what if I thought about myself as like, maybe I should behave in a way that is becoming of what I think that I should be. And maybe this is sounding bad, the way it's not coming out right, the way it came out in my head. But I started to think like, there's a certain self-perception that if we perceive ourselves as holy and as pure and as children of God, that we would actually behave differently, right? I have a class that I teach in the hospital, just to like staff and people that come in. So it's in the chapel, and it's very centrally located. And so last year I told you I was sharing these thoughts for high holidays, and I said that story, and I was saying these ideas, and I was trying to argue that this Rav Soloveitchik here, his point is that people sin because of low self-esteem. They think like, well, whatever it is, whatever the sin is in your book, I wasn't kind to someone else because, who am I anyway? They don't care. I'm nothing. So people think they're nothing, and then they don't therefore treat other people. So I was saying that people make mistakes because they think that they're not. They think lowly of themselves. So there was a woman in the class, and she walked out. She started crying when I said that she walked out. So luckily I saw her later that day. I didn't know her. She just stepped in. And I said, I'm so sorry. I hope I didn't offend you, or I wanted to introduce myself. I know that you seem to be affected by what we were talking about. And this is what she told me. She said, Rabbi, I was with a man. I've been with a man for 30 years. I've been married to a man who abuses me, who treats me like garbage. And I always thought to myself, this is what she said to me. I always thought to myself, well, I can't go anywhere because I won't find anyone better. And I who am I? Like, I'm already like, I think she even used some kind of derogatory term. Like, I'm already, I don't even want to say it. She's like, so what am I supposed to do? And she's like, and lately I've been realizing that I need better for myself. And I heard you say that, and I realized this is why I stick around, because I think I basically deserve this, and I can't do any better. But I realized. And it's not that I said, she said she's been realizing on her own already, but she said, I realized the only reason I am treated the way I'm treated and the way I put up with it is because I have low self-esteem. And if I would have better self-esteem, I would take better care of myself, I would be in a better place in life. And I all of a sudden started realizing that this is all connected and there's something profound here. So when I came across this piece, so that class that I teach, we're studying Pirkei Avot. So we have in chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot, there's a line, Al teh rasha b'fnei atzmecha. Don't be evil in your own eyes. And there was a commentary of Rabbi Aaron, of the founder of the Lakewood Yeshiva, right? So Rabbi Aaron Cutler. So this is what he writes. This is the bottom page 12, and I thought this hit the nail on the head. He says, "Zeusha amru alti rasha b'fnei." When it says, "Don't be evil in your own eyes," what does it mean? He says, "Shekain hagorem hagadol lachet." The main thing that causes people to transgress, to violate their own values, to sin. Who? She'atzmo eino chashuv be'einav. They don't think highly of themselves. Ve'ein kan adam. I'm not even a person. V'zeh shamarnu. This is why it says, she'akart erech atzmo. Recognizing your own value, your own self-worth. Erech means worth, right? He gorem gadol letikun ha'maisim yoter mikol. Recognizing your own value is the best way to fix your actions. V'tzarich lahakir gamkin, you have to recognize also ki kadosh, the holiness, hashari betocho ubekirba, that is within you and inside of you. Hu ikro, that is really who you are. Hu nitzchiyuto v'nishmato, and that's your permanence and your soul. Ve'ein zeh kamo sheba min achutz l'toch. It's not like it comes from the outside, it goes into you. El shezeh pnimiyuto v'atzmuto, but that's actually the essence of who you are. That the holiness, and with this I think we could start to, and we'll open it up, this way I think we can start to even say that maybe these two approaches can coalesce. Because on the one hand, Rav Kook felt that sin just has an impact on your soul, and even though your soul is pure, the sin clouds it, it makes it dirty, it makes it harder for it to shine. But he's also arguing, the basis of that argument though is that deep down we are all holy. The same thing, Rav Soloveitchik and Rabbi Cutler, they seem to be concerned that a person only goes against their values because they don't really believe in themselves, and they think lowly of themselves, and that's why they transgress. And so if we were to go all the way back to the non-kosher meat example, so, the question becomes one for you to answer yourself. If a congregant were to ask, I ate this non-kosher meat, what's the impact on my soul? So, if the answer is, well, let's open it up now. I saw some hands, so now let's see. Any reactions or comments or
I have a
thoughts?
different comment.
Sure.
It strikes me that part of the problem with the high holy days, at least in liberal synagogues, is that people come to synagogue and they are told through the liturgy that they are in fact not, not really.
Hashem Nimagad.
Right, and again, we would all say if you had only 2 days a year, you wouldn't pick Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but these are the days that they pick. How do you deal with a liturgy that says exactly the opposite message?
Right. Don't you think it's possible? It must be that that's our challenge then, to find a way to read it like this phrase, hasnish. We're saying, do we deserve to be punished and it's over? Or can we say I'm better than this. I know I can do better, and I believe in myself. And guess what? God believes in me because we're going to keep going. So I'm recognizing like where I've been, and that there's so much more that I can accomplish. And like you're right. You can definitely read a lot of things that make us feel less. But if our challenge then is to figure out how to frame it.
Such an act of retranslation, and it's so difficult.
Right. I like that.
Just as you were talking, I kept thinking about Moses grinding up the golden calf and making the people ingest it.
Yeah.
And that, all of the sins with the kosher, non-kosher meat, I mean, the food is the one that comes inside of us. And so there's something about ingesting all of the things that we do wrong and what that does to our esteem.
Right.
And maybe, the fasting on Yom Kippur, there's this sense of that maybe there's another way to fill yourself with like what you experienced with that patient, to fill yourself with the good deeds, and how do we let that be what satisfies us.
That's great. That's a great way to read. I mean, it's these things that we did, they're not me. Don't let them become right. I like that.
It's obviously finding the true balance between the right partner and the left partner, right? The story of the whole world was created for me, and
Right.
the other partner done nothing. So trying to find a balance between those two worlds, I think would be your
Right.
Makes
Right.
sense.
Certainly arrogance is not what we're trying to advocate here.
Exactly.
But a sense of self-worth and like I can do better and like actually God cares and I should care and like I have value. God believes in me. Yeah. Yeah, so let's conclude. Any final comments, questions? Yeah.
I heard a Yom Kippur sermon once where the rabbi went through the liturgy and pointed out all the places where God says, I love you, I care about you, I expect more from you because you're better than this. And so that side is in the liturgy too. And people were like, I never noticed that before in this matzah, but there it was. And
Right.
that's the other side.
Yeah.
It's there at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a patient, so I'm going to put it back to you. If you have a patient who is sick and says, I just found out that my kosher meat hasn't been kosher, and I think that's why I'm sick.
Right. Right. I mean, so you put it back to me that's usually the way we deal with patients is we would say something like, we'd help them figure out, like, do you really think, and then we'd help them ask questions that would help them analyze, like, in their life, do they really feel that that's how things work? And if they needed that sort of, like, pastoral authority, is the term we use, to tell them no, so especially with the patient. So personally, I would say no. In fact, I would not even share the view that it possibly could because of the feeling that someone who's vulnerable is more likely to exaggerate that. And I would just totally share the approach. No, there's a school of rabbinic thought that it's only when you actively transgress or rebel against what you know to be right, and therefore, according to that whole school of thought, you have done nothing wrong, and we believe that you're able to, make it right because, you are still holy and pure. So the final comment.
Just to add on what you said, there is a very famous Hasidic story of a poor lady that couldn't have enough money to buy a kosher chicken, so she was sent from one kosher to the other, and finally when she got a chicken, that she wasn't sure if she's kosher or not, but when she came to the rabbi, and she asked, Rabbi, is this chicken kosher? The rabbi looks first at the woman and her needs,
Very good.
and then at the small details of the kashrut of the chicken. So I think that's Hasidic principle is.
Very good. So it should be an inspiring, wonderful holiday. I hope this is hopefully helpful in any ways. And I have more of these sources. So if you need anything, please feel free to contact me.
Are there other
Oh, yeah.